Hey, what's up, you guys? My name is Grace Lauren Taylor, and you are listening to episode 17 of the Trauma Dump Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Here at the Trauma Dump Podcast, we seek to answer the question, what is mental health? How do I take care of my own, and how do I support others? This week, we will be discussing the topic of BPD, otherwise known as Borderline Personality Disorder, with our very special guest, Ivy. Be sure to go check her out on TikTok and support her for being on this episode. Ivy's TikTok is _red_Ivy_. Remember, if you'd like to share on the show, please message us in our podcast Discord in the participants channel, along with your unique experiences, and we will match you to the right episode. Just a quick disclaimer before we start. I am not a licensed health professional. This podcast only seeks to create community and further understanding of these topics that are so often overlooked and extremely misunderstood. If you or a loved one are in need of medical professional help, we have resources in our description. The topics discussed here are for always a mature audience, so viewer discretion is advised. Borderline Personality Disorder, BPD, is often confused with bipolar disorder, but I would like to stress on this podcast, those are different diagnoses. Bipolar disorder is, I'm pretty sure, bipolar disorder is often seen as a genetic disorder. More often than not, if a woman is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, her mother has bipolar disorder as well. Bipolar disorder and BPD get confused pretty frequently, but today we are not discussing bipolar disorder. If you would like to have an episode with us about bipolar disorder, please leave it in the comments below.
Did it hit record? Okay. Hello. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here. I would just like you to introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, and how you'd like to be addressed by me during this episode.
For sure. My name is Caitlin. I go by Ivy on a lot of my social medias just because that just tends to be what I use for my usernames and things like that. So Kate or Ivy, either way is fine. My pronouns are she, her. And I would like to add as well that I'm 22 years old. Usually I don't tend to speak about my age, but especially considering the fact that we are talking about BPD, I think that it is important for this specific conversation. So
Awesome. So you are comfortable with discussing your personal experiences?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And to make sure I'm not crossing any boundaries and respecting your experiences, please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you feel uncomfortable or triggered. We can also take a break at any time for however long you need to. And if you don't feel like answering a question, please feel free to say, hey, I don't want to answer that question, and I'll skip it. I promise I won't get offended because my priority is to make sure that you feel safe at all times.
Absolutely. I appreciate that.
Of course. So my first question would be, have you been diagnosed with BPD?
I have. You said have you, right? Not how.
Have you? Yeah.
Yeah, I have. So I've had a very extensive experience with the mental health system. I am in Canada, so things run a little bit differently than they do in the States. But I was first hospitalized in a psychiatric facility when I was 14. And then I was hospitalized again when I got to be about 15 or 16, I think. And I've been in therapy consistently since I was about 8 years old. I've been on and off of medications for, I want to say, since I was, again, about 12, 13, right about the age that I hit puberty. That's when things kind of started to go a little bit haywire, I'd say. I'm so sorry. My cat is being super annoying. Do you mind
It's
if I
okay.
just
Yeah, grab the kitty.
Sorry. I just gave him just some snacks to focus on because he was nudging into my phone.
Yeah, I get it. We have two cats. We have
Mhm.
Loki and Lucy is Lucifer, but she's a girl, so we call her Lucy. And
I
Loki
love
and
that.
Lucy are in the other room because they
Mhm.
are demons
Yeah.
and they like to chew cords. And so
Yeah.
cords, like all the cords, they're like,
Absolutely.
yes, let me have snack.
Yeah, that's exactly what was going on. My like headphones are dangling, and my cat's name is Aries, and he's an orange cat, so he just once he sees something, he obsesses over it.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. Lucy is a Maine Coon and then Loki is a Russian Blue.
Oh.
And they're very sweet, but they're again demons.
Yeah.
So we were talking about that you have a pretty extensive diagnosis history. Um,
Yes.
and you
Yeah.
first started getting medication when you were around the age of 12.
I, from what I remember, yeah. So I've had insomnia since I was very young. Pretty much as soon as I started to talk, I kind of stopped sleeping through the night. My parents have always told me that I was a very peaceful baby, that I wasn't like super difficult or anything. But the older that I got, the worse my sleep kind of uh, got along with it. But yeah, so I think it might have been a little bit later, but I do remember being on some form of medication to help with sleep when I was around the age of, I think it was about 13. Um, and then again, it was very much like on and off where it would kind of help for a while. But I do very much remember when I first started high school, I had insomnia so bad that I would go like days without sleeping. And at that point, I was, completely unmedicated. I was not on any sort of extracurricular drugs or anything like that either. I just couldn't sleep. Um, so that's kind of where it started, at least with like the stronger kind of medications. But it took a while for me to finally kind of get a diagnosis that made sense. I kept kind of I spent a lot of my teen years kind of getting label after label slapped on me. And, the thing with BPD is that it takes a lot of different forms and it is usually very tricky to diagnose. And the reason why I specify that I'm 22 is because of the fact that like normal teenage mood swings tend to kind of be a little bit similar to BPD. Because of that, it takes usually until you're after 18 to be able to be properly diagnosed with it.
Mhm.
Because a lot of the times behaviors that teenagers are displaying when they are between the ages of 17 or 18, 16, a lot of those will kind of calm down once the hormones calm down with it. But what they tend to see with people who have borderline is that the symptoms continue. And a lot of the times it can get worse because of the fact that it is borderline and not just regular teenage shenanigans. You do a lot of impulsive things. So you tend to dig yourself into financial holes. Reckless drug use, reckless drinking, and all of that kind of stuff. And all of that does affect your brain development as well. So it all kind of makes this perfect storm. But yeah, I first got diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder the first time that I was hospitalized. And then a year went by, I was in therapy for the entire time. But unfortunately, I just was still very much struggling. Um, I was on medications for that year as well, but things just didn't really seem to improve. Again, this is because I was being treated for anxiety and not emotional dysregulation, which was the issue at the root cause of all of this, right? So it's like you keep going to therapy and you keep getting told, like, well, as long as you do this, you'll start to feel better. But you never start to feel better because the issue is not anxiety. The anxiety is just a side effect of not being able to cope with any emotions ever.
Yeah, of course. And according to Johns Hopkins Medicine, mental health experts do not know what exactly
Mhm.
causes BPD. Some studies have shown it can be passed down through families,
Mhm.
and your social and cultural surroundings also may play a part. For example,
Mhm.
you may be at higher risk for BPD if you're part of a community that has unstable relationships. People are at higher risk for borderline personality disorder if they have suffered from abuse or neglect. Living with parents and guardians who have a history of substance abuse disorder or criminal activity also may increase the risk. And
Yes.
I say this because, BPD often gets confused with bipolar disorder,
Yes.
which is hereditary. You can get
Mhm.
bipolar disorder from your parents. But bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder are very, very different, are
Yes.
very, very different. And according to my research, there is, links to chemical imbalances
Mhm.
in your brain, hormonal imbalances. But usually when you get diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, usually when you get diagnosed with it, it is because that you have some form of abuse in your childhood or instability, and your brain doesn't know how to cope with stability. It
Mhm.
craves the instability, and it's really very difficult to deal with. And more often than not, women are diagnosed with BPD. Why do you think that is?
Um, Honestly, that's an interesting question. I think that I think that a lot of it obviously has to do with just the way that society treats mental health in men in general. I think that women are oftentimes, it's kind of expected of us to be emotional and crazy, so to speak, and lose control of our emotions. Whereas with men, it's not so much. A lot of the times, I find at least the men that I've known in my life, because there are men that I know in my life who both have been diagnosed with BPD and who suspect that they might have it, or, with where they have come to me and been like, hey, I think that, like, I relate to a lot of the stuff that you go through. Like, do you think that maybe this is something that I'm struggling with? And I think that the issue is just that a lot of the men that I know anyways, just don't feel as comfortable talking about their emotions. So they're still displaying a lot of the same behaviors that, um, people with BPD have. Yeah, very loud dog. They're still displaying a lot of the emotions that people with BPD have, but they just don't seem to.
It's
I
okay.
work with animals, so I have like four. So it's a very chaotic household here sometimes, which is fitting, for someone who has BPD to just kind of be surrounded by chaos all the time. But to what I was saying, yeah, I just think that it's less common for men to speak out about the things that they're feeling. I think a lot of the, guys who are experiencing these feelings of never really feeling like they know who they are, never really being comfortable with themselves, having these suicidal ideations and just wanting to be in chaos all the time and having chaos feel more familiar than stability. I think that they just aren't really able to voice it as much, which is why some of the diagnoses might get missed. But I do also think that there is, of course, unfortunately, a part of it where it's just, I think that BPD a while ago, anyways, like you were saying, where it was kind of called like hysteria. I think that there is a chunk of it that does come from this notion in people's minds of like, well, she's just crazy, so let's just slap BPD on her and get her out of the office, right? Like, so I think that there is a part of it that goes into that. Fortunately, I've been incredibly blessed to find a psychologist who is absolutely amazing, and really does like truly listen to me and what I'm saying. And I was only technically officially diagnosed, I want to say about a month ago, but it's been about 3 years that I've been seeing the same psychologist. And she, right off the bat, I went to go see her because I had heard someone speak about borderline in a YouTube video, actually, and I was like, borderline. It was a girl who makes videos about having dissociative identity disorder, actually, and she
Okay.
was speaking about how oftentimes people with borderline will also dissociate. And I was like, well, that's interesting because I can kind of relate to what she's saying when she's talking about dissociation, but I know that I have no issues with, having completely separate personalities. And the more that I looked into borderline, the more that I was like, oh, this would explain literally everything.
Mm.
So I ended up finding a psychologist, and pretty much the first meeting, she was like, so why are you here? And I was like, well, I think that I might have borderline personality disorder, and for these reasons, because I seem to experience all of these symptoms. And she's like, well, we'll keep talking about it, but from what you're telling me, I would say so too. Like, and I'm not sure how different it is in the US, but I know that at least in our mental health system, you can only be formally diagnosed by a psychiatrist. A psychologist can only kind of tell you what they think might be the issue. But yeah, I got totally sidetracked there. I also have ADHD. Okay. So I'm like, thank God you're here to keep me on track, because
yes.
Wow.
Yes, I also have ADHD, but I am medicated, and the meds are great.
Yeah.
Because I very much struggled in school and staying on task, but medication has really, really helped me. I take Vyvanse. It's the best medication I've ever had.
I used to be on Vyvanse, actually. I stopped taking it only because I seem to have found jobs that don't necessarily require me to stay on task for an extended period of time. I'm kind of bouncing between two jobs right now, but both of the career paths that I've chosen, I don't need to stay on one singular task for a long time. So I do dog grooming as well as retail work. So in both of those jobs, I can like bounce around and just switch it up all the time. So it lets my ADHD just kind of roam free. So I've been unmedicated from Vyvanse for quite a while.
I understand. So my next question would be, what is a common misconception about BPD that upsets you?
There's a few. I'd say that the first one, just in general, I've noticed that a lot. I'm sure that you've heard people, when they're talking not so nicely about certain people or people that seem to display sort of unstable behaviors, that they want to call them crazy, but they instead replace the word crazy with bipolar or borderline. And I've noticed that lately, there seems to be a big trend where there's a lot of awareness coming in with borderline. I do blame TikTok a little bit, because there does seem to be this large trend. Maybe it's just my For You page, but there does seem to be this large trend of people.
Sorry.
That's okay. There does seem to be a trend with people kind of using the BPD hashtag and kind of using that as a stand-in for crazy. And it upsets me because, especially when it's people that I'm closer to, or even people who don't know that I am diagnosed with BPD, where they will just kind of be like, oh yeah, well, she's not right in the head. Like, she's got fucking borderline or something. Oh, am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
Okay. But I'll hear that sometimes. Like, at one point, there was someone that I was working with who said that. And I was like, hey, that's not an okay thing to say. Like, I'm like, I get where you're coming from and you didn't mean anything by it. But I did explain to them nicely that, like, I understand what you're saying, and I know that you were just talking for the sake of talking, but you do need to be really mindful when you're talking about those things. It's the same thing when people, when they just like to have a clean house, or they like their towels folded a certain way, and then they, oh, I have OCD, like, and I'm like, no, my best friend has OCD and she can't leave the house without flicking the lights on and off 15 times. Otherwise she has a panic attack. Like, that's not.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with calling people a narcissist. Narcissistic personality disorder is a real diagnosis. Exactly. I do have a mother that has narcissistic personality disorder. It's like, it's real. It's very real. Yeah. And I hate when they call someone who is selfish or self-centered narcissist.
Yes.
Not the same thing. It is very much not the same thing. Let's stop diagnosing one another or using diagnostic terms in everyday lingo, because with this podcast, we're trying to share mental health information and become more trauma informed. a big part of that is not self-diagnosing, not diagnosing another person, because we're not medical professionals, and also not using diagnostic lingo as our everyday lingo of saying, oh, you're just a narcissist. I see it all the time on reality TV now too, where they're calling a problematic person a narcissist, or saying that, oh, that person is just so bipolar. It's like, or have you seen Love is Blind, the latest episode of, or like the latest season?
Okay. But there's a lot of people who have told me that I should watch it and that I'd probably like it.
It's amazing trash TV. But they're on this recent season, which is season 5. They talk about Uche, who is pretty problematic. I could see that he might have a personality disorder of some sort. He called himself OCD because he likes to keep his house clean. He's like, oh, I'm so OCD. I like to keep things in a general area. I could play the clip right now, but that's not what OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is a real disorder where people cannot function without their compulsions. And compulsions could be a variety of things, like biting your nails constantly. And if you don't have that stem of biting your nails, you could have like a panic attack, or like not being able to leave the house with flicking the light switch, or constantly checking your oven to see if it's on, even if you haven't cooked for like a month. Like, it's a compulsion. You cannot resist doing it. Keeping your house clean or being tidy, that's not a compulsion. That's you being raised in a way, or being raised in not a way, where cleanliness is, you know, a moral for you, of wanting to have things to be clean or tidy or put in their right place. I mean, I'm not OCD, but I do have compulsions, and one of my compulsions is to make sure that I vacuum at least 3 times a day, because I have 3 pets. I have a service dog and I have 2 cats. And if I do not vacuum, there's going to be hair everywhere, and that's not a vibe. But that's not OCD.
Exact same boat. I have 2 cats, a dog, and I had a hamster. He's no longer with us, but it's okay.
R.I.P. hamster.
But oh my gosh, hamsters just, I think, like, my friends and I joke around that, like, I can relate to hamsters, because like a hamster just does not want to be on the planet. They just don't want to be here.
They try to commit and die all the time. They'll just jump off of random things. If they get out, bro.
All they want to do is like hide behind the fridge and, you know, take the forever nap. But I'm like, honestly, same a little bit sometimes, you know, like
it's a vibe. Being a hamster is a vibe.
I think that the biggest misconception that I would say that angers me is definitely people trying to like just generally using diagnostic terms in their day-to-day life. I'd say that the other one is also, again, I think that this might just be specific to TikTok, or maybe just specific to my For You page, but I see a lot of teenagers almost like glorifying, that might not be the right word, but they kind of like build it up to be this like mystical, magical thing with, like, you know, having a favorite person and splitting, and it kind of turns it, to me, it's insanely cringy. But it's like, it's not like a superpower, you know. You don't, like, it's not like your favorite person is your soulmate, and when they leave you on red, you split, you turn into the Hulk. Like, that's not that's not what it is at all. And I keep seeing these like TikToks and stuff of things like that, and that's why I've been very careful to not speak that much about having the diagnostic of BPD on my TikTok page, because I don't want to attract that kind of information. So I always try to use the word mental illness, or, you know, I try to use more jokes that center more around DBT, because DBT can be so general and can help so many people with emotional dysregulation. I cannot stress how important dialectical behavioral therapy is to society as a whole.
Yes. And we had an episode with a DBT therapist. That was an amazing episode, and I really want to have her on again. Her name is Erin O'Brien. I'll put a link to the episode right here. But, you know, DBT is really, really helpful. I really want to do it. I have panic disorder and severe anxiety. I've C-PTSD, been diagnosed 5 different times with post-traumatic stress disorder by 5 different doctors. They're all like, yeah, this is not great. It has gotten better, but again, with post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of people don't recognize that if you do in fact have PTSD, it's not really something that goes away. You can get better over time, but those triggers can manifest at any time, like 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now. It's how your brain copes with the trauma, and it's not great. And a lot of people with borderline personality disorder also get diagnosed with PTSD. And I wanted to ask you if you have any other diagnoses other than BPD.
So obviously humor is one of my biggest coping mechanisms. So I tend to joke about these things a lot. But I think that, again, there's a very big difference between, being a part of the joke and then making a joke about someone else, right? So I try to be very careful to only talk, and joke about my own personal experiences. But I will sometimes say that, like, I have been collecting diagnoses like they're freaking Pokemon and not from my own doing. Like, I just, for a lot of my teenage years, it just felt like they kept putting label after label after label on me, and none of them ever made any sense. So it's been everything from generalized anxiety disorder, ADD, and then ADHD, and then major depressive disorder. And then I had a very large trauma that happened to me, where I was diagnosed with PTSD. And then the longer I was in therapy, she was like, "Oh, I think it's a bit more complex," you know? So then C-PTSD, BPD, yeah, I've had all of them, but like 90% of them all fall under borderline, right? So but yeah, so I was initially diagnosed with PTSD, and then I was kind of re-diagnosed, I guess, with C-PTSD, because the longer that we kind of dove into my childhood traumas, the more that we kind of figured out that, like, yeah, the main one definitely caused most of the flashbacks and, most of the shit that I was dealing with currently. But at the same time, I was still getting like major flashbacks, nightmares, all of that kind of nasty stuff from things that had happened to me, when I was like 5, 4, 6 years old. So, yeah, so I've seen a couple of diagnoses in my day, but to me anyways, that's why I always just kind of use mental illness, because it's like, to me it all falls under the same kind of deal. I know that, treatments for every specific person is going to be completely different, but for me anyways, I just kind of follow along with what my therapist tells me to do, and I just try to educate myself as best as I can on both things. But
yeah. The weather is making my voice so bad. But according to my research, the Mayo Clinic states that with borderline personality disorder, you have an intense fear of abandonment or some sort of instability, and you may have difficulty tolerating being alone. Inappropriate anger, impulsiveness, and frequent mood swings may push other people away, even though you want to have loving and lasting relationships.
Absolutely.
And I think that's also where people will confuse borderline personality disorder with bipolar disorder, with the frequent mood swings and the drastic shifts. But the biggest difference between borderline and bipolar is with bipolar disorder, usually you can track on a chart the waves of the feelings, and it's kind of a constant. I know this because I have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I don't know if it's necessarily true, but with the psychologist I was seeing at the time, say like 4 years ago, we tracked on a chart, and yeah, it's very regular of the, they would call them mood swings, but I think it's more likely than not that it's just anxiety right now currently.
Yeah.
But it'll be the swing of having extreme mania for like 2 days. I'm still in a manic state for the next 5-6 days. And then it's a severe depression for at least a week to 2 weeks. And everybody can get depressed. That is a universal feeling. But
Absolutely.
to have depression is to be in a depressed state for a week to months to longer. And I'm not talking about like sad boy hours in the corner because your boyfriend broke up with you. I'm talking about like real depression where your mood does not go up. You're constantly sad, and angry is part of it. It's I have a feelings wheel right here.
Yeah.
But it's mostly, so the mania is mostly here, and then the depression is mostly here. And with borderline, it just like all the time. It's just moving. It's just moving all the time.
It can be a blessing and a curse. It's a curse night like 8 times out of 10. But one of the like soul blessings that I get from it is that, yes, another thing as well is that the emotions are so incredibly intense. It's not just, you don't just get angry, you get beyond frustrated. I mean, like the angriest you've ever been in your entire life over the smallest things. You're not just happy, you're overjoyed. You're not just sad, you're destroyed emotionally. Like it's these like these emotions so intense that you feel them throughout your entire body. And it's like, it's not just waves, it's tsunamis of emotions that just completely knock you over off your ass. And it's like, sometimes you feel like you can't get up. But one of the blessings is that, like, because of that, because your emotions are so all over the place, they're so intense and they switch so quickly, I don't think I've ever been depressed for longer than 2 days. But when I am depressed, it gets incredibly dangerous because I start having suicidal ideations, and because it's so intense, it feels as though I've been depressed for years and I've never felt joy in my entire life. But it's gone within a couple of hours usually, or not, if not within 24, right? So it's like, I'll be like literally ready to, die. And within the next day, within 48 hours, I'm, in this state of mania and I'm feeling great again. Now, most of the time, I find that the downs will sort of match the ups in intensity. So if I have had an incredibly good couple of days and I feel invincible and I've done so many cool things, I will crash and get incredibly depressed. Same thing goes for if I'm having a really low couple of days, maybe I spent the entire day being tired. The day after, I will usually be like insanely energized, like as if I've had 3 Red Bulls, you know what I mean? But I think something else that's interesting to mention about mania as well, just because you brought it up, is that I found anyways personally that I also experience a lot of irritation during mania, which is, I find something that people don't talk enough about, because I'm like, it's not necessarily just good emotions. It's just like you don't think about consequences anymore. Like they just don't go through your brain. So any sort of emotion where you're like, something angers you, you're like, you almost like you want it to. You're like, good, great. Now I have a reason to, fuck shit up. And so I find that tends to happen to me a lot when I'm in mania as well, where I get very irritable and like the tiniest little things will sort of tick me off. And it's like, because I just want things to be done immediately. And if they're not getting done immediately, then I get like very upset and kind of frazzled. So.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question, a segue, because you're talking about these giant emotions. How does BPD impact your relationships?
I would say that it definitely it affects all of your relationships, especially romantic ones, but as well as just like, my relationships with my family members, with my friends, with coworkers, with my bosses. Obviously there is parts of that where it is like some of that is just residual trauma from having C-PTSD and having these different traumas that have happened to me throughout my life from, authority figures or, friendships gone wrong in the past where I feel like I can't trust others. But there is a lot of it that is just mood swings. And like you said earlier, you know, when you have BPD, you are incredibly driven. Everything that you do is in order to not get abandoned. Everything, every decision that you make, you know, you are completely driven by this need, or at least I am driven by this need of not being alone. Um, so it's like, I find that it does affect me in my friendships, not as intensely as it does in romantic relationships. But I've had quite a few very messy relationships in the past. And, you know, I find that it's very rare for someone with BPD to say that they're still friends with an ex. Because things usually, when they end, it goes up in flames completely, right? Now, I've been very blessed where I still, you know, have some contact with some of those folks in my life. But the reality of it is, when you do have BPD, you don't tend to, you know, be completely aware of your actions. That's not to say that they're not your own. I always am sure to completely take responsibility for anything and everything that I do myself. However, a lot of the times it just, again, you are so taken over by this feeling. And sometimes usually it's perceived abandonment. It's not even, you know, somebody could have just like said, you know, I love you in the wrong tone of voice. And all of a sudden you're completely spiraling and you think, well, if they hate me, then I'm going to hate them. And so a lot of the times you do tend to kind of hurt people around you, which just exacerbates the cycle, because the more you hurt people, the worse you feel about yourself, the more you want to hurt yourself, the worse you're exacerbating your symptoms. So you just kind of start like snowballing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely does affect your relationships. If anything, I would say that it affects your relationships as much as it affects you in your day-to-day life, because of the fact that it's so driven by this fear of abandonment. You're just constantly clinging on to everyone around you for validation, just to feel heard, to feel seen. And when you don't, or even sometimes, you know, because you crave chaos, sometimes they give you exactly what you want, and then your brain goes, no, I don't deserve this, I'm gonna ruin it. Like so it is very difficult to maintain healthy relationships when you do have borderline. But I think that as long as you are being conscious, as long as the people around you are aware of your struggles, you know, it's not their responsibility to look after your emotions. But if they can be aware of them at the very least, it can be easier for them to understand why you might need to take space from them a little bit, just so that you can regulate by yourself and then come back to them in a calmer, more stable state of mind, excuse me, which is, I found that that's what has worked out best for me. Especially in the last year or so, I have managed to keep some friendships that have become like my people. They are just like, they're, you know, the best things that have ever happened to me. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. But yeah, it's very important you have to be very, very mindful with when you're interacting with people. You know, you have to kind of question, like, what state of mind am I in right now? Am I reaching out to this person because I miss them and want to interact with them? Or am I reaching out to them because I feel low and I need them to regulate my emotions for me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I think, because I can speak on ADHD because I have ADHD. When you have ADHD, my dad would equate it to being a fishbowl person. And you're swimming around in your fishbowl and you forget that something exists, and then you see it and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever.
Yes,
and he would
exactly
equate that with friendships, where you'll have these friends and they'll be buddy with you for as long as they're in your sight. And then once they're kind of out of your sight, it's not like they don't matter or that they're not good friends or that you're not friends with them. It's just that they're no longer in your sight. Therefore, they're not in your brain, and you don't think about them until you swim back around and then you see them again.
Exactly.
And that's me, 100%. I love having friends. I have really good friendships, but they don't live near me. They all live very, very far away.
I feel that.
It sucks, but it's true. And I think those are the best friends because you communicate with them when you both can.
Absolutely.
It's not like they're in your general vicinity and you have to see them all the time. I think those honestly are the best friendships when
Yeah.
there's not a timetable of like, we see each other, so we're going to work each other into our schedules.
Mm-hmm.
I think with being an adult, that's kind of the vibe now of like, oh, I have this and this schedule, and I'll just like work you in. I'll make time for you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like those friendships. I prefer the ones where you're just vibing and you see your friend having fun, and you're like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, hello friend, how you doing? And hang out
Yeah.
with that friend when you hang out with that friend. And if you don't see them for a month or a year later, it doesn't mean you're any less friends, but
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's just like, it is what
Yeah.
it is.
It's funny you say that because one of my dearest friends, he lives on the other side of the country, literally. Like I'm in the Atlantic, he's in the Pacific. So he's like, we're 4 hours apart time zone wise. But he is genuinely like one of my, favorite friends that I have. And that's the way our friendship works. We send each other like these big long like Snapchat videos. And there's times where like I'll go days without responding, he'll go days without responding, but like we've been friends now for like almost 2 years, and it's like it works. And it's like I know that he's always going to be there for me and I'm always going to be there for him. And it sucks that I may never get to meet him in person. Hopefully one day I will. But yeah, I also love those friendships. Like the ones where you're always together are great too, but those ones I find are the ones that are, especially when you have BPD or when you have ADHD, those are the ones that are the easiest to manage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And from my own experience, I've never really had a best friend because I found it draining.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because, I with anxiety, with ADHD, like I hate to say it, but sometimes you become bored with some people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that they're boring people. It's that for me, from my experience, it's that I've heard your same problem over and over and over again, and I've
Mm-hmm.
given you solutions to fix it. You have not
Mm-hmm.
fixed the problem. You're just complaining about the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to talk about something else.
Yeah.
And so often when you have a friend that's very in close proximity to you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they usually have the same problems. And then with people that are far away from you, like when you tune in, it's a new problem every single time. And it's kind of exciting for ADHD Grace of just
Yeah.
being like, oh, this is new. Yay. I
Yes.
like new things.
Exactly.
This is a new issue. We
Mm-hmm.
shall solve it with the council. Whether or not you take the advice, it's not near me, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
It's not as
exactly.
big stakes, I guess,
Yeah,
what I
for
would say
sure.
that.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
with borderline personality disorder, it affects how you feel about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it relates to how you behave and how other people interpret you, and then you
Mm-hmm.
interpreting how they're interpreting you, like you're judging me,
Mm-hmm.
meh. And that brings an intense fear of abandonment. It's like you talked about how you'll be super hyped up one minute doing all these things and the next minute
Mm-hmm.
super depressed. And what I can assess from that is with that fear of abandonment, like if you're in that depressed state and that friend that you just hung out with, you had a great time, you have these like intense feelings of just like something's wrong, because I feel
Yeah.
that something's wrong. There may not actually be something wrong, but because of those intense feelings, and
Mm-hmm.
they're very, very real. I think so many
Yes.
people just conflate it with, oh, they're being dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
No, 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 no,
No.
no. No, 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 no. Those
And
feelings
I
are
am
very real.
I am a very dramatic person. I do like hype things up for the bit a lot. But yeah, no, when you have borderline or any, I think that any, person, if they're saying that that's how they feel, then that's how they feel. I think a lot of people kind of tend to, well, I wouldn't feel that way, so why are you feeling that way? And it's like, well, because you're not that person. You haven't had their experiences, you haven't lived their life, you haven't, been through what they've been through, so maybe this is super triggering for them because of things they've been through in their past that you haven't been through personally. So it's like I always think that like, someone's reaction, I mean, unless it's like aggressively directed towards me, but I think that like people's reactions to things are usually valid because it's their emotions.
Mm-hmm. And the symptoms of BPD are an intense fear of abandonment, even going to extreme measures to avoid real or imagined separation or rejection, a pattern of unstable, intense relationships, such as idealizing someone one moment and then suddenly believing that that person doesn't care enough or is a cruel person, rapid changing in self-identity and self-image that includes shifting goals, values, and seeing yourself as bad, or that you don't exist at all, or that everything is futile and why should I exist? I don't exist. Like a lot of BPD symptoms are periods of stress-related paranoia or loss of contact with reality, lasting from a few minutes to a few hours. Periods of stress-related, like, just have you ever had those feelings of like, I don't exist, the world is not real, I don't know what I am, but I don't exist?
Absolutely. I always say that there's like two kinds of dissociation, where there's like the existential crisis dissociation, and then there's just like the TV static dissociation. So like the existential crisis is exactly what you're talking about, where like I will just zone the F out. Nobody can kind of get through to me, and that's it. I just kind of get into these loops of like, nothing is real, nothing matters, I don't matter because nothing matters, so why would I matter? I am nothing. Does that mean like, and then you just kind of start to spiral. But then there's also the TV static dissociation, which is the best way that I can explain it. Where it's like, it's not exactly like a you're not thinking of nothing. It's almost like it's an out of body experience. You are like floating, you feel like you're not actually inside of your body, and you're not really able to think cohesively whatsoever. It's almost as if like everything that's usually happening in your brain, you're not actually experiencing it, you're just kind of watching it happen in another room. So it's like, it doesn't feel attached to you, which is obviously a coping mechanism that a lot of people develop after being traumatized or being traumatized over and over again. Because when you're being screamed at, a lot of the times the brain, especially when you're a young child, will just sort of, nope, I don't know how to deal with this. I've never had, I shouldn't have to deal with this. Therefore, I just refuse to. Where the brain will just sort of shut down. And a lot of the times I find that when I am being re-triggered, or when I've, been through very, very heavy emotions, my brain will oftentimes do that. If I feel like I am being triggered, or if I'm going through a new trauma, my brain will just shut down. And a lot of the times, I almost go kind of nonverbal, where you just like are totally zoned out and your brain refuses to kind of snap back. And it's like, sometimes, people will try to kind of get your attention again, but you just can't. You're just staring into the abyss, and it's just like, you're done. You're tapped out.
Yeah, definitely. More like symptoms of BPD are impulsive and risky behavior, such as gambling, reckless driving, unsafe sex, spending sprees, binge eating or drug use, or sabotaging success by suddenly quitting a good job or ending a positive relationship. Have you experienced any of these symptoms?
Oh, absolutely. I've definitely struggled with my own addictions. Addiction runs rampant throughout both sides of my family. There's alcoholism on my father's side, which unfortunately related in a lot of the childhood trauma that I went through. And there's also alcoholism on my mother's side of the family. Now, fortunately, my mother has a much healthier relationship with alcohol, where she is able to, kind of put a stop to it when she knows that she needs to. She doesn't really drink a lot, or at least not excessively. But there's definitely, not from my parents personally, but there's absolutely, issues of drug abuse and drug use throughout my family. And I was definitely around drugs consistently as a child. It's another thing with BPD as well, is that you tend to spend a lot of your childhood not being listened to. You tend to, there's a lot of neglect in there, but you're very used to being put in dangerous situations and feeling unsafe. And you become so used to it that when you become an adult, safety doesn't feel safe. You feel more comfortable, you feel more at home. So like, for example, with me, it's like a lot of the times I feel more comfortable alone in the middle of the night, 2 a.m. at a bar by myself than I will feel safe in my own house. Because it almost feels more secure to me, where it's like I feel more comfortable around, a bunch of chaotic, dangerous, drunk people, because I was around that more often than not in childhood, right? So, but yeah, I think that you know, I am definitely a very impulsive person. I think that I recognize that. That's definitely the biggest struggle that I'm still going with right now. Thankfully, my sense of identity has really gotten better. That's one of the symptoms that my psychologist and I worked together on. But the biggest thing that she told me that really hit home with me was that she was like, there is no set, like, stop focusing so much on who you're supposed to be or who you are, because you change every single day, and that's okay. Everyone is constantly changing all of the time. So she's like, anytime that you're trying to figure out who you are, don't worry about it. You're going to reinvent yourself next week anyways. It doesn't matter. So just be what feels right now, and never mind the rest. Like, don't try to figure out, you don't have to, be like, this is who I am and this is who I'm going to be for the rest of my life, because that's who I am. It's like, that's not how life works, But yeah, I'm a very, very impulsive person. I've definitely done a lot of impulsive things. Yeah, definitely like engaging in dangerous activities, obviously going out alone a lot of the times. I wouldn't say that I live in a incredibly dangerous city. Like, the city that I'm in is not huge by any means. We always call it like a little big city. But but yeah, of course there's, I've dealt with my own fair share of, drug abuse and all those kinds of things. Definitely like the binge eating for sure, ruining good situations, ruining good relationships as well, good friendships. There's been, and there's a lot of guilt that comes with that as well, especially when you ruin something that is really good for you. There has been, obviously there's like a specific incident that comes to mind, but there are some mistakes that you can't come back from. And there are some things that you say that you can't take back. And there are some things that you do that you can't take back. And you just kind of have to learn to live with it and hope that, eventually, the more that you work on it and the better that you become, that they'll be able to forgive you eventually with time. But, it's unfortunate, but I have hurt the people that I love. Probably I've hurt them the most. Like, the people that I love the most tend to be the people that I hurt the most, which sucks. But when you grow up not getting, the love and the attention that you wanted, you don't tend to think that you deserve it in adulthood. So when someone gives it to you, when a partner is incredibly sweet and caring and loving, you tend to sabotage it, and I managed to find ways to sabotage things in ways that cannot be fixed. So it's like, and I'm able to kind of laugh it off now, but a lot of the times, like, my impulsivity is definitely one of the biggest struggles that I still have with my BPD. And I think that it's definitely one of the hardest things to get over, because again, it's impulsive. So, it's the parts of your life or the times where you're just not in control. You don't feel like you're in control. You let your emotions take the steering wheel. And, I always compare it to driving a car, and that I always feel like my emotions are driving. Sometimes I'm in the passenger seat, sometimes I'm in the back seat, and sometimes I'm screaming in the trunk. So it can oftentimes feel like you're not in control. At the end of the day, you have to take responsibility for what you do. But a lot of the times it can kind of it's infuriating, because you almost want to be like, this isn't me. I'm better than this. I can do better than this. And yet the behaviors keep happening. But
Yeah. And some more dangerous symptoms of BPD are suicidal threats or
Yeah.
behavior or self-injury, and often in response to fear of separation or
Mhm.
rejection. And I remember you talking about how some symptoms of BPD are also like symptoms of just being a teenager.
Mhm.
And I think that's also very true. And these angry feelings of like, well, if you leave me, then I'm just going to die,
Mhm.
right? I have felt that before. And I,
Mhm.
as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, little Grace.
Yeah.
Like, what are you thinking?
Mhm.
But people with BPD have these intense feelings and
Mhm.
intense self deprecating, self injury, self like hatred, these
Mhm.
horrible feelings. They're very real. And I had a friend in college who had BPD, and it was very scary sometimes of like her and her
Yeah.
boyfriend would not be okay for whatever
Mhm.
reason, and she would just not want to exist anymore,
Mhm.
and in the ways of just wanting to die immediately.
Yeah.
And she would force herself to be with her friends because she was like, well, if I'm not gonna be with my friends, I'm gonna kill myself, I'm gonna hang myself right now, is what she would
Mhm.
say. And it's very scary as a person
Yeah.
who has witnessed those moments. It's very scary. And I'm wondering if you've ever had those like intense feelings of just,
Mhm.
I want to end it all.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, honestly, like, if I'm being perfectly real, as as recently as about a month ago, which is when I was hospitalized and put on medications again. Because I had been almost 2 years without being on anything. I would obviously, like I still recreationally like drink and smoke marijuana, but other than that, I was not taking any pills. I had a Xanax prescription, which I had been totally fine with for about 6 years. And it's only, I want to say, within the last year or so that it kind of started getting scary. And that I kind of started abusing it instead of using it in the way that I had been for the last 6 years. But um, yeah, no, exact same thing, and there's a lot of guilt that comes along with it. I think that, or at least I've been told by my therapist, that I'm a lot more self-aware than a lot of people
Mm.
who have BPD. I think that it's because, I was sort of raised in a household where I maybe felt like I had to solve the problems. And where, it kind of felt like, I needed to settle the fights and I needed to be the one to, because they weren't listening to each other and I was the only other one there. So they'd listen to me. Um, but I totally lost my train of thought there.
It's okay. You were talking about how you felt you needed to settle the fights and you were the mediator.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that that's resulted in me being very self-aware, but what comes along with that self-awareness is a whole lot of guilt because I am incredibly aware of how my actions affect my friends, but unfortunately, I don't have the emotional maturity to be able to actually put a stop to these behaviors. So, you know, there was unfortunately like one very specific night where again, you know, there was a sort of disagreement going on, and I felt as though I was being abandoned. Um,
Mhm.
Even though it was perceived abandonment, it was not, that wasn't actually what was going on. But I felt incredibly triggered. There was a man who had said some very inappropriate things to me, and I spoke out about it. And I was accused of lying, which, with my personal trauma, that was incredibly triggering to me. And I just sort of spiraled out of control. And a lot of the times I will call my friends, similar to your friend, where I will rather, I don't want to be alone in those moments because I'm kind of scared that if I'm alone, it'll just keep getting worse. Um, and because I just have this cosmic luck, I was on the phone with her, and I was saying that I was having these really dark thoughts, and kind of, just saying the same kind of, I don't want to live anymore. And, this is too much. And the pain is just, overwhelming. And my phone died. So she obviously thought the worst, was incredibly scared for me. And she, ended up asking RCM, RCM, I was going to say RCMP, but she ended up asking the police to come do a wellness check on me, which in retrospect, I hold absolutely no animosity towards her for that. Of course, like if I was in her shoes, I would have done the exact same thing. And honestly, with the way that the Canadian mental health system is right now, it was reasonably the only way for me to be seen by a psychiatrist within the next 4 years.
Wow.
So because my family doctor is no longer in practice. She's closing her practice. So I no longer have a family doctor anymore, meaning that for anything, I either need to, wait days to be seen inside of an ER, or I wait until it becomes an emergency, like I unfortunately had to about a month ago. So they brought me to the hospital by ambulance and everything. But that, of course, was re-traumatizing as well. But at the same time, I'm like, well, it kind of is the only way for it to happen, which I find is unfortunately a commonality. Whoa. Is a common thing that is going on with a lot of people who are struggling with mental illness in Canada. And I think that it needs to be spoken about a lot more, because it's completely insane that we have absolutely no access to any sort of resources, unless, so you can see a psychologist. You can't pay to see a psychiatrist in Canada. You have to be referred. It's the only way for you to see that. In order to be referred, you need to have a family doctor. You can't just go to a free clinic. And then even if you are referred, so it takes like anywhere between 2 to 5 years to get off the waiting list to have a family doctor. Once you do have a family doctor, it can take months to even get a referral. Once you have the referral, it can take up to 2 to 4 years to even see or have your first appointment with the psychiatrist. So it's like, it is a royal mess.
Yeah. And it's not any better in the United States.
Exactly. I know. Yeah. So it's like, it's unfortunate, but a lot of the times, like, it was kind of a blessing in disguise for me to, have to go through that in the way that I did, because it sucked. And I'm the only part that I regret entirely was scaring my friend. Every other part of that, I'm glad it happened the way that it did. I just wish she wouldn't have had to see me in that state, and that she wouldn't have had to worry about me in the way that I know she did. That is the only part that I regret entirely. But everything else, I'm like, it had to have happened that way. There was no other way for me to get help. And it's unfortunate, but I think that a lot of people are kind of in the same boat, where their only option is going to emerge, and they don't want to because they don't feel like it's that serious. But if you need the help, you need the help,
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of the reason why we have this podcast. Part of the reason, because we want to become more mental health informed. Mental health is real. It's just like your physical health. You need to be aware of your mental health. If you are struggling, you need to reach out, because I mean, I've wanted to have this podcast for years. I started it a year ago and ran into some legal trouble that has nothing to do with podcasts, but they did not want me to have a social media presence, so I couldn't do the podcast.
Interesting.
Hate them. Anyway, so I'm just going to divulge some personal information just for vibes, because this is the Trauma Dump podcast. We're going to talk about trauma.
Absolutely.
When I was, say, a junior in college, my dad was hit by a car. This was 2020. My dad was hit by a car in our front yard, and he suffered from extreme TBI, broke all of his limbs, and he was in the hospital. This is during COVID, so there was only one person allowed to visit him per day, and my mother decided that she was going to be the person to always take that spot. I was very much a dad.
Diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder. I've had a partner in the past, an abusive partner who was actually diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder. So I feel you very strongly there when people like misuse that word, where I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's so much worse than you think it is.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's
but
horrible.
that's awful. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense that you said that. And unfortunately, people who have that disorder just don't have any sort of consideration for the people around them, which is very difficult when
Yeah.
you happen to be close to them.
Yeah. And so I have two younger siblings who I'm not going to mention their names because they have told me not
Mm-hmm.
to.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother decided that she was going to cut all of us off financially. So I was 19 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so she took us, and they were 17 and 15, 14, around that age.
Mm-hmm.
She took us off of health insurance, car insurance, phone plan, iCloud, everything. She totally disowned all of us. And so it was then up to me, oldest child, to figure
Mm-hmm.
that out for me and my siblings, to figure out our phone plans, to figure out, oh, like we don't have iCloud, but we don't have storage for all, oh my God, all my pictures going to get lost because,
Mm-hmm.
and I have been a content creator since I was 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on YouTube since I was 8 years old. Have I ever had a following? No, but I vibed really hard. Like it's what I've never wanted like a following or anything like that. I just wanted to share
Yeah.
my life. It was
I
just the
relate to
vibe.
that spiritually. It's like,
Yes.
I'm not vlogging for y'all, I'm vlogging for me. Like, this is just my little video diary. You guys, if you decide to watch, that's on you, man. Like,
Exactly. So that was little Grace just wanting to make videos because I've always wanted to become a film director. And one day I will
mhm.
be one. So
Yeah.
I was panicking. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all of my stuff. I was freaking out. And I worked for my parents and I also was a nanny. So I had $30,000 saved up because
Ooh.
I was on it. I was on it.
Hmm.
And she took us off of everything. So I'm like, okay, I need to figure out a way to support my siblings, which I was a full-time student at Texas Tech University. So I
Hmm.
wasn't working a job at the time, but I was working for my parents. So technically I had income. My mother
Hmm.
took all of us off of that as well.
Okay.
And so I was like, I have no income. My dad we thought he was going to die at any moment. We thought he was going to
Hmm.
die. So
For
I
sure.
started developing seizures and I already had panic disorder. I was diagnosed with panic
Hmm.
disorder at 15. So it got worse, like really
Yeah.
bad.
Hmm.
And so schools had just started opening up again for us to return to school. And at the same time, my sibling was about to go to Texas Tech with me.
Hmm.
And it was stressful to say the
Hmm.
least.
Absolutely.
It was really, really bad. And
Hmm.
I by the time 2021 rolled around in April, I started getting very, very suicidal,
Hmm.
like extremely so. And I self harmed in the way of slamming my head against the wall and giving myself concussions to kind of turn myself off because I didn't want to exist. I was in so much agonizing just pain. I only saw my dad a handful of times in the year since he was hit by a car, because he was hit by a car in June, so it was now April.
Hmm.
And so I was in a very bad relationship with a guy who took roids and
Hmm.
wanted to be Mr. Muscles, and
Hmm.
he was not a great guy. But I was in a relationship with him because I needed someone to support me.
Hmm.
And in my brain, that was the only way that I could get support because all of my friends didn't want to hear about it. So I was like, okay, well, have a boyfriend.
Hmm.
And one day I got a notification from, now, mind you, I'm an honor roll student. I graduated with honors from Texas Tech.
Oh my God, that's
I've
awesome.
all Thank you. I've always been on honor roll. I graduated high school with an associate's degree. So I was very, very on it. And
Hmm.
for whatever reason, one of my professors contacted me and said that I was cheating. I have never cheated a day in my life on anything,
Hmm.
any relationship, anything, ever, ever, ever. That was
Absolutely.
very
Yeah.
much against who I was as a person. And he said that I cheated, and he put it on like a discussion board. So we were responding to I'm a theater major, but it was a music discussion over music. And
Hmm.
apparently I had written something so eloquent, like within 5 minutes of the discussion, I had written, I think, 3 paragraphs of something. And he said, that's obviously cheating. He didn't check what it was. And all the other students saw this and they were like, how is she cheating? Like, even some of my own classmates went up to bat being like, she's not cheating. You can't find this information anywhere. This is just her own word vomit of just what she thought of the discussion. And so he escalated it to the dean of students and the dean of admissions to try and say that I was cheating while my dad is dying in hospice. And I'm losing like my ever loving mind. I'm already suicidal. And so I tried to commit. And my boyfriend at the time was in the room with me. And so he did what was necessary. Like, he prevented me from further killing myself. Took me to a hospital, broke up with me, which great, broke up with me. And then he called my mother, which he should not have done because she's not a good person.
Yeah.
And so I'm strapped to a bed. Like, I'm bleeding from the head. My head is super hugely swollen because that was the way I tried, was slamming my head against a concrete floor, like very, very hard. So I had a very bad hematoma, which is a brain bleed for those of you that don't know. And my mother comes. She's not empathetic, sympathetic at all. She's like, why would you do this? My husband's already dying. Why would you do this to me? And I was like, okay. And so they hospitalized me in a psychiatric facility for, I think, 5 days. And I was finally on medication for those 5 days, but it felt like I was in a trance. Like, I didn't feel like I was actually there. I don't know if they like drugged me so I couldn't do anything, but I got medicated, and then they put an ankle monitor on me so that they could track me. And it was one of the worst experiences of my life. And finally, when I got out, apparently some people that knew me, that were a part of the psychology or whatever degree plan, they knew me. They started talking about it to other people that knew me in the school, that, oh my gosh, I found Grace in the psych ward. Grace was in the psych ward.
Oh my God, that makes me very upset.
So they started telling
I
people.
just say that like very calmly so that I don't like amp myself up. But I'm like, wow, that pisses me off.
So
like, that's like the first rule that they learn when they go into psychology or like med school is like patient confidentiality. But like, sure, okay.
Yeah, I had none. And so the word got around. It got around to my roommate finding out that before I even told her. And then like a bunch of people, complete all of my friends. I had a very large group of friends, never talked to me again. My roommate moved out without me knowing, because apparently I was a danger to her now. Because there's like a rumor mill of just like Grace tried to kill herself, or that Grace and her boyfriend got into a fight and Grace fought her boyfriend. There was just like so many rumors, so many just what is even happening.
Yeah.
And that was junior year, Grace Taylor. My dad, and then that was in April. In July, my ESA cat, who I brought with me to the dorms, had a heart attack and he died. And then a week later, my grandpa died. A week later, my grandpa died of a stroke. And then 3 months later, my dad died. And
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was just shit on shit on shit, blah, pile. And after my dad died, my mother said, I don't want to be your guarantor for your apartment anymore. So I'm going to like say something to the apartment complex. So you need to get out of your lease. So I had to pay $1,800 to get out of my lease. And she
oh my goodness
told me, oh, you can just sleep on the couch. She has 4 bedrooms in her house. I had to sleep on the couch, and I was dating a new guy at the time who's now my partner. We've been together for almost 2 years. And he was like, do you want to stay with me for a little bit? I was like, yeah, I would like to stay with you rather than sleep on a couch. And I started staying with him for literally 3 days. And my mother texts me, 8 days is long enough. Pack your stuff. I need that space. I need that room. I need all your stuff out. And so I became homeless and lived in
Oh
my
my
car
God.
for 4 months until he and I got an apartment together.
Goodness gracious. I mean, I find that that tends to happen a lot when you are in an unstable family environment, where you are kind of forced to speed things along in a relationship, even though you don't necessarily want to. But it's just that, like, you don't really have a choice because you have nowhere else to go. And it's the only place where you feel safe. And obviously, everyone deserves to feel safe, where they live and where they sleep and where they eat. So it's like, I've noticed that a lot with a lot of my friends who have been through trauma, especially like just trauma involving their family or have grown up in unstable family dynamics. It's like a lot of the times they tend to go super fast in relationships, and it's usually not their choice. It's just because like circumstances happen where it's like, this is just what we got to do in order to feel safe.
Yeah, and it's real. Like
Yeah.
he and I did not really want to live together that fast. I'm very glad
Mm-hmm.
that we did. Our situation
For sure.
is unique. He's a
For sure.
very amazing man. He's a plumbing apprentice about to get his tradesman license. He's so
Sorry.
determined. It's okay.
I don't mean to laugh. That's just a really weird coincidence, but
Yeah.
um the person that I am sort of seeing, anyways, he's a plumber as well, so I just thought that was funny.
That's awesome. Tradie, let's
They're the
go.
best. Tradies are the best. They're hardworking and they're usually just like solid. I've found, anyways, most of the time they're just like solid, stable
Mhm.
people.
Yes. And so he has been the most stable force in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I love him so very much. I would love to
Mm-hmm.
marry him one day if I'm lucky enough for that. But we're like, we
No.
need to be more mentally stable, both of us. Like, there should
Yeah.
be a little bit more mentally stable. And so I say all of this because, trauma is extremely isolating.
Mm-hmm.
And trauma is extremely, because nobody knows how to talk about it. Nobody knows how to say, hey, I'm going through a lot. I don't need your advice. I just need you to listen.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes when people are asking for people to listen, when someone's asking, hey, I'm going through something, will you just listen to what I'm going through? The other person thinks, oh, I need to fix that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I need to fix this for them. And then when
And
they
it
don't,
comes from such good intentions, but
yeah,
you just kind of want to be like, I just need to say this out loud so that I know that it really happened and I can start to process it. But I haven't even accepted that it's happened yet. So I just need to get it out.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I want to ask you this question. What do you think of the saying transmuting pain into purpose?
I read that when you sent me like the questions list, and I've loved it. I've been like thinking about that ever since you sent me that email, because that is exactly what has driven me. There was one specific event where I sabotaged probably one of the best relationships that I've ever had. Um, and it's what drove me to taking therapy seriously, to start buying my own workbooks and really putting in the effort, and not just showing up to therapy, but genuinely, I mean, like taking notes and doing the assignments that she gave me, and really just doing absolutely everything that I can to finally get my shit together and stop hurting the people that I love the most. So I think that's exactly what I do. I mean, my friends and I joke that I run on spite and coffee, but like, it's true. I think that the only way to make it through any difficult situation in your life is to take it as a learning experience, and not just
Mm-hmm.
what can you learn from that, but how can you learn to how if you find that you were at fault, how can you learn to be better? And if it was someone else who was at fault, how can you learn to surround yourself with better people, right?
Mm.
um so I think that, yeah, transmuting pain into purpose is something that I have lived by for quite a while now, but I have not been able to put it so eloquently into words.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I came up with that with my grandmother a while
Mm-hmm.
ago of just talking about my trauma with her, and she was like, well, how are you going to put a positive spin on this? How are you going to use what you've gone through to help other people?
Yeah.
It's just like, podcast.
It is. It's a great way to just, because I think that podcasts are, I think that it's just like with everything else, there's like a toxic side to it and there's a fun side to it and a serious side to it. But I think that it's just a good opportunity, because I think that the most important thing is to have these conversations with people who have really had these experiences. That's the best way to educate yourself, is just to talk to people who have actually gone through it.
Exactly. And that's what I really want to do. Like, I've had so many people ask me, like, well, why don't you want to become a therapist or a psychologist or a social worker or something like that? Like, well, I first and foremost, I'm not healed.
Mm-hmm.
I am not fully healed. I'm 23 years old.
Absolutely.
I know what I want to do with my life. I know I want to become a director. So that's not really the path that I want.
Mm-hmm.
But also, those people have so much intense work of just
Mm-hmm.
helping people and being stability for people who don't have stability. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not in my wheelhouse.
No,
It just
because
isn't.
I think that there's also a very big difference between, I think it touches into what you were saying earlier, but a psychologist's job is to fix the problem. You know what I mean? Their job is literally to, not just pay attention to what the person is saying, but to try and find ways to help them cope with that. Whereas what you're doing is really just having a conversation, like friend to friend. It's like you were saying earlier, where like sometimes you just need someone to listen to you, right? So if anything, I think that both things are incredibly important. Like,
Yeah, peer
therapy is
support
super
is so
important.
important. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
Therapy and peer support should go hand in hand with your
definitely.
healing journey. And that's what
Absolutely.
I'm trying to provide. We have a
Yeah.
Discord server that is completely
Yes.
anonymous where
Mm-hmm.
anybody can join and talk. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. It's not like 24/7 where people will be on like all the time, but it's
Mm-hmm.
whenever you need it. Whenever you
Yeah.
need to talk to someone, there's always someone on there. I'm legit serious. There's always someone
Yeah. No,
on there.
exactly. I've been on it since you messaged me first, and I don't send a lot of things, but I love reading all the things.
Yeah. And so that's the aspect that I'm trying to go for, is peer support and
For
becoming
sure.
more trauma informed with these discussions,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know everything. I would like to learn
No.
more. I love researching,
Mm-hmm.
and with this platform, it's so expansive. We could talk about just like anything,
Yes.
honestly.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it could be very helpful for a lot of people to recognize whether or not they might have like a disorder. Being like, oh,
Definitely.
I'm going through this. I resonate
Yeah.
with what Ivy Caitlin is saying. I resonate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe I should go try to get a diagnosis for
Mm-hmm.
this. That
Because
could
that's
be,
exactly how I started my journey, right? Was that I saw like a YouTube video of someone who like briefly mentioned borderline, and I was like, what the fuck is borderline personality? What is that? And then I looked it up and I was like, oh shit, I need to speak to a therapist soon.
yes, exactly. The podcast purpose is to identify trauma,
Mm-hmm.
how we help heal ourselves, and how we
Mm-hmm.
help others. Because
Yeah,
trauma is not who you are, it is what you go through.
exactly.
Would you consider what you've gone through as trauma?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. There was a lot of fun and light and good times in my childhood, but there was some seriously scary moments too. There was times where it was a question as to whether I was gonna have a house to go back to tomorrow morning. There was times where, I was scared for my life. I was left alone a lot as a child, which I think is why I tend to kind of overshare as much as I do, because I'm like, somebody listen to me, please. I was an only child and did not get enough attention. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely like, there was one specific abusive relationship that was, unfortunately, it definitely snowballed and caused me a lot of pain that I've had to overcome. But I think that, with time, doesn't get, it doesn't necessarily hurt any less. You just find ways to be able to kind of cope with it. Like I said, dialectical behavioral therapy has been an immense help, because all it does is it teaches you how to deal with overwhelming emotions.
Yeah.
And I think that that's incredibly important to everyone on this planet, because everyone experiences emotions that are overwhelming, that become out of control. But especially when you do have PTSD, when you have these traumas that are so, when you get those flashbacks and when you wake up from those nightmares, it is intense. And when you have those coping mechanisms, when you're able to use the rest techniques or the distraction techniques or just any of the lovely techniques that are taught in DBT, it can literally save your life. Can also, it can save your day, but just in general, it'll help you to not feel so powerless against the things that have happened to you. It helps you to take control again of, your life, and not feel like your emotions and your trauma is what's controlling everything, but instead you are the person behind the steering wheel.
Yeah. So how has your diagnosis affected you positively?
Positively, I would say just that finally, because I was in therapy since I was 8 years old, and it never really felt, I was like, I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing because everyone keeps telling me that I'm not normal, but it's not helping, and I just keep ending up in the psych ward again. So finally getting the diagnosis of BPD and being told, okay, our next move is starting dialectical behavioral therapy, that was incredibly helpful. So I think that a diagnosis is not a label, and it should not be treated as such. It's not a label to be slapped on someone's forehead. It's a map to show them the way to go next, right? So it's not about, you have BPD, that's who you are, you're stuck with that for life. It's about same thing with bipolar, with, anything else, OCD that you get diagnosed with. It's like, this is something that you have that affects you deeply. Therefore, here's the way out of it. Here's how you cope with it. Here's how you're able to make the most out of it, right? So I think that definitely is obviously there's a part of it that felt validating, where it was like, there's a name for this. I'm not just broken. But I think the main part is just exactly that it showed me that there's a way out. I'm not going to be stuck like this for the rest of my life. Things are going to get better, and I can make sure of that. I can take control of these emotions, and I can make something out of it.
Awesome. Going forward, I want to ask, how can I support you?
Do you mean you specifically, or just
how
can people? Yeah. I guess it's just, I think that you're already doing a great job just letting people speak on their personal experiences and not, making assumptions or anything. This has been an absolutely lovely conversation. But yeah, I just think that giving people a voice without judgment is incredibly supportive in itself. So honestly, I think you're already doing a good job. But if we're talking about how can, if anyone listening has a loved one who has BPD or experiences, emotional dysregulation or suicidal ideation, I think the best way to help them is just to, encourage them to do the things that make them feel good and make them feel safe. And, try to bring those things around them more. I think that a lot of the time, sometimes when you try to push meds and push therapy onto people, it makes them feel like it's a chore. Also, to anyone listening, please don't ever accuse people of being in a manic state, because that can trigger a manic state. Never try to assume the emotions that someone's going through. Just be there, listen, don't judge them, and just encourage them to do things that makes them feel good. And if you don't know what makes them feel good, just ask them.
Yeah. And the long-term prognosis for BPD is actually
Mhm.
better than those diagnosed with depression or bipolar disorder.
It is, yeah.
However, it requires a specialized approach.
Yes.
The bottom line is that most people with BPD can and do get better.
Hmm.
And usually they get better much faster with the right treatments and support from
Yes.
their peers, support from their family,
Hmm.
and support from, in general, loved ones. So if you know someone who has BPD, again, treat everyone with kindness, but
Yes.
show them love and support.
Hmm.
And instead of asking, hey, what's wrong with you? Or, hey,
Hmm.
are you feeling okay? Or, hey, I saw you do something that I don't really think is in your character.
Hmm.
Instead of using judgmental statements, we want everyone to use supportive statements. Be like,
Hmm.
hey, I noticed something. Are you are you are you going through something? Do you need to
Hmm.
talk? Do you need to
Yeah.
talk about it? Or say, hey, how can I support you today? Or, hey, I'm just checking in on you. I miss you.
Hmm.
Something like that. That's not a judgmental
Yes.
statement. That is not putting
Hmm.
a label on someone. That is not saying, hey, are you depressed? Or, hey,
Yeah.
are you manic right now? No,
Yeah.
no, no, no. Just say,
Yeah.
hey, I want to check in on you.
Yeah.
But it's like, I
Yes,
want to do
exactly.
this statement,
Hmm.
not
Yeah.
you're doing something wrong.
Hmm.
Because even if you have all the good intentions
Hmm.
of wanting to check in on a friend, it's
Hmm.
important to say this is something that you want to do
Yeah.
rather than I feel compelled to do it because you're acting poorly or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
So,
think that one of the my favorite quotes that I've heard on TikTok was that someone, and this is like sort of related to that, but not really, but someone was saying that when someone, says that, okay, they need to log off of social media, or hey, I need to cancel plans. I'm not feeling great today. Like I just need a break from, my social battery is dead. But she said, thank you for taking care of yourself. And I love that sentence so much. I use it a lot. But anytime that my friends, are trying to set a boundary or anything like that, that's always what I try to keep in mind is like, thank you for taking care of yourself. Thank you for letting me know. Um, I always like the homies, I'm like, drink your water, take your meds if you have them, eat some food if you don't. Either way, drink some water and eat some food.
yes. So,
Mm-hmm.
speaking directly to our listeners, what would be your message about healing?
Um, I think that it's not a destination, it's a highway that you're on and that you're going to be on for the rest of your life. um, you're never going to stop healing. There are continuously going to be things that are going to happen to you that are going to be really scary and really tough and that are going to hurt a lot. And you're going to need to learn how to heal from that all over again. So it's a road, and you just need to um, learn to enjoy the view while you're driving, if that makes sense.
Huh. Do you have any resources or recommendations that you'd like to share?
Specifically for BPD, there is oh my gosh, of course, I don't think I do have it with me. Okay.
We're
I
going on
just,
a journey.
I don't want to get the name wrong, so I'm going to grab my therapy books real quick. Specifically, of course, uh, everyone's resources are different depending on their state, their country, etc. But in general, if you have Amazon, these are available on Amazon. They're called the New Harbinger Self-Help Workbooks.
Okay.
Mike fell out right on cue. This one specifically is the Dialectical Behavior Therapy Skills Workbook, the second edition. It's a little green book for those of you who are watching instead of just listening. But yeah, this is just basically DBT 101. It has been incredibly helpful in my day-to-day life, and I'm sure that it'll help anyone else who deals with emotional dysregulation as well. If they do have specifically borderline personality disorder, or if they suspect that they might, also by New Harbinger self-help workbooks, the Borderline Personality Disorder Workbook. These two things together have made me make more progress in therapy than anything else. So those would be my two recommendations. And other than that, just find a good therapist that you're able to afford, or at the very least, just find like a counselor, a social worker, anyone at all that you can speak to who is neutral. So who's not going to have a sort of bias, and who's able to kind of give you this outside perspective on the things that you're telling them.
Yes. And from my understanding of dealing with BPD can be very isolating, and you may want to isolate, but I want to say, please try to avoid the temptation to self-isolate and make it a priority to be in touch with family and friends that make you feel good. You need the support of people who will listen to you, make you feel cared for, and offer reality checks when needed. So don't neglect your physical health. Eat healthy, move your body, get up off the couch. If you're feeling depressed, just literally doing this sometimes will make me feel so much better.
And one thing that I do sometimes, if I'm I call it rotting or melting into the couch, but if it's nice outside, if there's sun outside, even if it's not nice outside, just go see outside for a second, just for a second. And if it's nice outside, if you're rotting on your phone on the couch, just go rot on your phone outside. It's slightly better. And then you can feel a little bit better about yourself because you went outside today.
And vitamin D is important. Most people in our generation are actually vitamin D deficient, which is
oh, absolutely.
So again, avoid the temptation to self-isolate. And I'm not talking about needing alone time. Needing alone time is valid. But
absolutely,
when you self-isolate, you're I don't deserve to be around people. People don't like me. I don't want to be a burden to people. You're not a burden. If the people that think that you're a burden don't need to be in your life, number one.
No.
If they're making you feel like a burden, I'm not saying that your perception, but they actually calling you a burden, cut them out. You're so much better off without them, and you will find people who love you and support you and think you're the best in the entire world. So when you're healthy and well rested, you are better able to handle stress and control your emotions and behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No,
for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
If you're watching us over on YouTube, here are our memes of the week, carefully curated and selected by our Discord server in the memes channel. If you would like to have your meme on our Memes of the Week episode segment, then please send us your memes in our Discord server. At the end of every episode, we spin our wheel of emotions to learn a new feeling and how it correlates to my trauma. All right, it landed on awful, which is in the disgust category. Okay, awful. Otherwise known as revulsion or detestable. When do I feel awful? Detestable, revulsion. I don't really feel awful very often. I do know that some people try to make me feel awful. So just a little, okay. I know that people do try to make me feel awful, especially people that try to guilt trip me for living my life. I think the feeling of awful, which is disgust, the feeling of disgust, I don't get it very often because I'm happy with myself. I'm happy with who I am as a person. I think the best way to combat those feelings of disgust is to accept yourself. Now, I really like to dye my hair fun colors. I really love my curls. I do my best to take care of them. I do my best to take care of my skin, my appearance. And I know a lot of people will feel disgust with the way that I look because I think that is them projecting onto me what they feel inside. I'm really comfortable with myself. You know, I haven't always been. It took a very long time for me to feel really comfortable with myself. I remember when I was 15 years old, I was not comfortable in my skin. I wasn't comfortable with my sexuality. I wasn't comfortable at all. But now, as a 23-year-old who has an amazing, amazing partner who I love so very much, and I am very lucky to live in an apartment with him and share a life with him, and he loves me, and he has, through his love, I have learned a lot of self-love. I've learned a lot of self-assurance that no matter what size I am, that doesn't determine my worth. You know, I have hypothyroidism. I have a couple genetic diseases and I have seizures. So it is pretty difficult for me to be very physically active. I don't eat a lot, but you know, my body is the way it is, and I appreciate my body for all it's doing for me. It doesn't always work very well, but you know, it's doing its best, and I appreciate being alive. I think the best way to combat people being disgusted with you is to try to recognize that feeling. Why are they feeling that way? Is it because of something I did? Well, if it's not because of something you did, is it because of who you are? Because more often than not, when people are feeling disgusted with you, it's more of a disgust with themselves. And I find, especially if you are assured in yourself and people are disgusted with you or the way that you live your life, whether you are a part of the LGBTQIA spectrum or you're living out of wedlock like I am. I'm not married, but I'm living with my partner, and people will find that disgusting. It's not. You choose your own morals. You choose your own values. You choose the people that you value, that you will take, you know, whatever criticism, whatever critiques, whatever opinions, you choose whether to believe them or not. Special thanks goes out to all of our Discord users. Thank you guys so much for being on our Discord, and thank you for sharing your memes. It really means a lot to me. If you'd like to support our podcast, we have a Patreon. Different tiers can get you a Gracelet, which is a bracelet made by me, Grace, or you can get a sticker. The link is in our description. We also have custom apparel on Bonfire, designed by yours truly. The link is also in our description. Any support helps us out a lot, so please, if you feel compelled to, please rate the show over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching us over on YouTube, please like, share, subscribe, and chill with us. Comment down below what episode you would like to see next on our podcast. I love you guys so very much. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, you are capable of a fulfilling life in spite of your circumstances and your trauma. May you rise again from the ashes and be filled with peace, hope, love, joy, and understanding. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye-bye.